Okay, here's the last video for the day, so I'm just gonna quickly run through policy. Just make sure before you go too far that you know the difference between fiscal policy, which is one whole section, the president and Congress, government and taxes, government spending and taxes, and then monetary policy, which has to do with interest rates, discount rate, reserve requirement rate, money supply, all that stuff is monetary policy. That's the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell. So fiscal policy is pretty easy. One thing's taxes go up and government spending goes down, or taxes go down and government spending goes up, depending on if you want to get elected or not. All right, so expansionary fiscal policy, we're trying to pull the economy out of a recession. Okay, we're kind of addicted to expansionary fiscal policy in the United States. That's lower taxes, any kind of taxes, income taxes, corporate taxes, okay, sales taxes, real estate taxes, and an increase in government spending. Okay, so more military spending, infrastructure spending, buildings, municipal buildings, etc. The problem with it is you have a budget deficit. We have a $2.3 trillion budget deficit this year, which contributes to the national debt, which I believe is about 27 trillion total. So I don't normally care about numbers, but this is an important number, AKA I care about it. So you do want to make sure you know that. Okay, make sure you know the difference between deficit, which is the annual shortage, and the national debt, which is our total accumulation of shortages. Like contractionary is just the opposite. Well, why would we want to use contractionary fiscal policy? You use it to get voted out of office if you don't want to serve anymore. Okay, but seriously, it helps to fight inflation, and also if we need a budget surplus, okay, we want to reduce the national debt, this would be what we would need to do: raise taxes and decrease government spending. Okay, fiscal policy, just remember it has to do with taxes because fiscal starts with F, right? And we file our effing taxes. Just not a pleasant thing to think about, right? Speaking of which, I need to do my taxes. Our Uncle IRS gonna come knocking at my door. Okay, now we're gonna go over monetary policy. I'm just going to do expansionary. Why? Macro is the land of opposites, right? So if I know expansionary, then everything that's the opposite is contractionary. All right, so remember, it's the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell is the current chairman of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, the previous one, currently Secretary of the Treasury. Expansionary monetary policy, remember, it's lower, lower, lower. The only thing that gets bigger is the money supply. The Fed funds rate, the rate at which banks borrow from each other, okay? If that gets lowered, that's expansionary. The discount rate, the rate at which banks borrow right from the Federal Reserve, if that gets lowered, and then the reserve requirement. Why is the reserve requirement getting lowered? Why is that expansionary? Well, if banks need to hold on to 10% of deposits, that means of $1 million deposit, there's 100,000 they need to hold on to. That's 100,000 they can't loan out, which is what they want to do. If the reserve requirement gets lowered to 5%, that means that they only need to have $1 million deposit. They only need to hold on to $50,000. They can loan out $950,000 now instead of $900,000. It's more money in circulation, right? Expansionary monetary policy. Think big money, right? Okay, more money out and circulating in the economy. Okay, now how the Fed funds rate is the most important one because it's what the Fed uses most commonly. And the Fed buys bonds to increase the money supply and lower the federal funds rate. So make sure you know your money market graph, okay? So if the Fed buys bonds, they're putting cash in the U.S. banks. money supply is in the banks, not in the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve has an infinite supply of money. Just checking the time. So if they buy bonds, remember, bonds are not money. If the banks give bonds to the Federal Reserve and receive cash, that increases the money supply. Well, if the money supply increases, SM1 to SM2 shifts to the right, the Fed funds rate decreases. And that's the process by which they do it. Now, this is just the quantity of money here, which is essentially going to be the same thing as the supply of money. And again, contractionary policy is the opposite. Fed raises the federal funds rate, raises the discount rate, raises the reserve requirement. Contractionary monetary policy, contract money, smaller money. The Fed sells bonds, okay, to the banks. The banks send the cash back to the Federal Reserve. Okay, I forgot to put the arrow indicating in the first one. But anyway, contractionary monetary policy, cash leaves the banks to the Federal Reserve, decreasing the supply of money. Okay, the money supply decreases, shifts to the left, and we have the opposite effect of the federal funds rate going up. Remember, bonds could also be called securities. So AP isn't going to say buy bonds because they know the buy bonds, big bucks mnemonic, so they might say the Federal Reserve purchases securities. What type of policy is that? I'm the AP College Board. Come and see how smart I am. Okay. So this BBBB is just for buy bonds, big bucks. SB is sell bonds for small bucks. All right, with the policies, you really should be in good shape if you just remember one side of the ledger, then the other side is just the opposite. Know your vocabulary. Don't flip-flop fiscal and monetary, okay? Monetary policy has to do with the money supply, right? Interest rates, fiscal policy. Joe Biden is in charge of fiscal policy. You'll never hear anybody say anything about Joe Biden's monetary policy because he just is going to appoint the chairperson of the Federal Reserve, and that person then has the monetary policy. All right, that's the end of today's videos. Thank you for joining. Click and like and subscribe, or whatever it is you're supposed to do. Okay.